All right, let's go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on the Code Adoption Toolkit review and resources, and then also code proposals webinar. This webinar will be recorded, and the recording link is sent out to all attendees. We've moved our recordings over to the Code Adoption Toolkit, which you'll see later today as well. I've released a poll to kind of identify who's in the room, if you wouldn't mind filling that out. I'll end it in about 10 seconds. So this training is provided by the Colorado Energy Office with training materials created by, that should say, Noresco and Mozingo Code Group. As you can see here, we've got just a few weekly Wednesday webinar series coming up to finish up our series, just 3 more. So if you are interested in attending, that registration link is sent out in the follow-up email as well. And then just to note, the functional testing webinar for lighting controls has been moved from the 5th to the 12th. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. It's loading. Okay, so we've got majority building officials today in the room with a few others. So thank you all for joining us today. Hopefully we can answer some of your questions. All right, so then I did want to launch one other poll just to get an idea of who has used the Code Adoption Toolkit. We'll be covering that today. So just to get an idea if you're familiar with it, some of you have probably gotten the link popped up through one of these webinars. And so we'll go over that today and all the resources that are included on it. So let's see here. I'll go ahead and end that poll. And it looks like we've got a majority of people that haven't used it. So I'm glad that we'll have the opportunity to kind of walk you through it today and everything that's on it. Okay. So where is the Code Adoption Toolkit located? I think that's the first question that we kind of need to answer. You know, through these webinars, it pops up. It should pop up for you as a resource or as a link. But if you just go ahead and Google Code Adoption Toolkit, it is the first thing that pops up. So if you click on that, it brings you straight to it. Otherwise, if you're on the Colorado Energy Office's website, you can drop down Climate and Energy, go to Energy Policy, which will bring you here, Building Codes, Code Adoption Toolkit. And we've got, this is what it looks like with all of the drop downs and everything. So bring it back here. So yeah, there's a bunch of ways to access it. You know, this toolkit was created for building officials and staff, which seems like a lot of whom's in the audience today. But designers, contractors, energy consultants, and communities can also use this resource in considering updating iCodes or talking to your city council about updating iCodes. So one of the drop downs that we have is talking about the benefits, and that's where it kind of comes into play of why update, right? And so there you can get lower insurance rates for jurisdictions. The Building Code Effectiveness Grading Schedule program actually has in place where if you have, it's based on your building code enforcement and what codes are in place, and that can actually reduce your jurisdiction's insurance rates. And then there's the obvious energy code savings, resilience of buildings. You know, these buildings are using new technology, new materials that really make these buildings last a lot longer. And then there's always the factor of contributing to local climate action plans. You know, Denver has their own climate action plan, Boulder, a lot of these cities do. So maybe that helps identify where your community wants to head. There's a lot of available training and software that is in particularly focused on 2018 and 2021. We do have some trainings on 2015 as well, but the older codes, a lot of jurisdictions in Colorado are still on the 2003 or 2006, 2009. And the resources for that are pretty minimal for if you're onboarding someone and they need to learn about training. They're just not as widely available. And then there's also the software piece where, you know, ResCheck and ComCheck, if they're being updated for bug fixes, probably not as much on the older codes. And then something else to consider is also the consistency for designers and builders. You know, as going from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, if you're working on two different projects in two different areas that have different codes, it can be pretty difficult for someone to keep track of which building codes to follow. So updating to the 2015, 2018, or even the 2021 kind of creates a more level what's required, I guess, for designers and builders to recognize. And then the last thing is the flexibility for home builders. There's a bunch of new pathways for compliance that have been added to the 2015 or later codes as well. So how to navigate the code adoption process. So some of you may know this, that in 2019, the Colorado legislature passed the HB19-1260, which requires jurisdictions to adopt one of the three most recent versions of the IECC. So that's 2015, 2018, or 2021. And so a lot of jurisdictions are now making that change, and we do offer technical assistance to get you through the to adoption and then also continue through the training. So here you'll see an implementation plan that looks at what happens after adoption, what a typical training schedule could look like. And I know in one of our future webinars, we're actually going to be going over an implementation plan and what it looks like for jurisdictions, what recommended trainings there are, and different things like that. But the best way to really learn the codes is to get involved. So with the, there's a whole drop down in the navigating the code adoption process that does link to a bunch of newsletters, how to join a committee, and different things like that. So be sure to check that out. Jim, I do see that you have a raised hand here, so I'll go ahead and allow you to talk. You go ahead and unmute yourself. Okay, I don't hear you, Jim, so I'm going to keep going, but let me know if you want to chime in. Okay. So then we have another drop down for summary of code changes, and we've created Shauna and I have created a bunch of documents on significant changes documents, and then also code comparison documents from 2009 up to 2021. So the latest one, these documents here are the significant changes from 2018 to 2021. And then there's also a pretty long document for residential and commercial that looks at, like, if you have a question on a specific code section and what the changes are between 2009 through 2021, if your jurisdiction is adopting that, you can actually go and scroll down to the section and see how it changed. Okay. Then looking at, a big question that we get is, what are the costs to updating these energy codes? And there are some upfront costs that you need to consider. Code books, training, construction costs increase, more staff for compliance, publishing notices. There is an upfront cost to updating code cycles, but from what I've seen, and Shauna, correct me if I'm wrong here, it is kind of a little bit easier rather to do it, say, every code cycle rather than making those large jumps that we're seeing a lot of jurisdictions do now, where they go from 2003 up to the 2018 code. It's a big change in terms of training, and so it might be something to consider in creating a code adoption plan with code cycles. And then there's also what's the payback, so looking at simple payback years, you're really seeing a pretty immediate or just like a couple years more in terms of cost jumping from the 2015 to the 2018. But I feel like that makes this a little bit less scary. And some of this data was taken from PNNL studies and National Home Builders Association. Next dropdown is advanced building codes and amendments. Here we've linked to a bunch of different amendments that through our technical assistance program, we can help you adopt or incorporate into your building code. But there's different codes like the Building Decarbonization Code, which can be overlaid to the 2021 IECC to deliver more carbon neutral performance for new construction. There's the EV Ready, Solar Ready. There's also Zero Energy appendices where Appendix CC and RC provide a model for applying new renewable energy generation when new buildings add electric load to the grid and different things like that. So those things can be specifically adopted by your jurisdiction. And then there's Zero Energy Ready Homes. That's something that I've seen Summit County area take up and adopt. We did a bunch of trainings last year on that program. Then all electric new construction and the IGCC are just kind of starting points for where to look and consider what you want to maybe adopt to align with your community's energy goals. And then just looking at other codes around the country, I've worked on Title 24 Part 6, the NY Stretch Code, and then there's different things like LEED and Passive House and Living Building Challenge that can also be used to kind of frame the amendments that maybe you would consider eventually including into your building code. And then another important piece is benchmarking programs. And this benchmarking, if you're not familiar, refers to measuring a building's energy performance, energy consumption compared to similar buildings and kind of seeing where you're at on that map. There's free programs like Energy Star, Portfolio Manager that helps you kind of benchmark that. And I know a lot of cities like Denver, Fort Collins, Boulder have their own benchmarking programs as well. So if you're interested in doing any of these advanced amendments and codes, please feel free to reach out to us and we can work with you to maybe include them. Or if you're just interested, maybe there's other resources we can connect you with as well. Then looking at compliance resources, we've created a troubleshooting code interpretation guide. And so that guide is focused on 2018 and it answers questions about how the different I-codes interact with each other, where there are conflicts, alignments, and how to interpret some of the code requirements that we've heard from building officials may have trouble with. So the goal of that guide is to just provide clarification runs through compliance pathways and different things like that. And Shauna actually just updated plans examiner checklist. So we've got a couple of those, commissioning checklists, res check, com check guides, and manual JS and D guides as well are all posted under that compliance resources dropdown. So we've, as I said before, we're now moving all of our recordings and different things over to YouTube. So these links all go directly to YouTube. I'm hoping that it's a little bit easier for you all to access them. And so right now we have all of the webinars. These are all the webinars that we did this year. And we're going to be working on getting the ones from last year as well posted on this site. And then in addition to that, there's also the opportunity to request a group training that's tailored to your jurisdiction or company. If you find that you're going to be doing, say, a lot of multifamily projects, or you're mechanically focused and you want to hear about the updates, those are the things that we can work with you to train your staff on. And then looking at additional resources, this is kind of where we've got links to SWEEP, ICC, AIA, National Home Builders Association, and then a lot of the cost-effective and energy-saving reports that are referenced in the cost impacts dropdown, but also provide a lot more detail. They're pretty in-depth reports. If you're looking for justification, that also might be a good place to look for why to update codes. And then I wanted to talk about the Colorado Energy Code Collaborative. So this team of people, I mean, it's a community group where we meet to discuss strategies, challenges, updates, and ideas for advancing energy code compliance. You know, this collaborative encourages a widespread of industry professionals to join, including code officials, state agencies, and energy raters, builders, utilities, energy advocates. If you are having a problem with code compliance or adoption or something like that, this is a really good place to have a jumping off point and kind of bring your concerns, and we can set you up with the appropriate resources. And then we are having our next meeting on May 14th. If you are interested in joining, please feel free to email Christine Brinker at Southwest Energy Efficiency Project. I've got her email there, but if you are interested in joining and you forgot our email, feel free to just email me and I will connect you. Okay, and then we have the ICC's call for committees. And so the 2024, as crazy as it seems, it's coming up for engaging stakeholders and joining the committees to replace the governmental consensus process from prior adoption code cycles. So this is a really great way to learn about what's coming through the pipeline for the new codes, and the application to apply to join one of these committees is coming up on April 23rd. I've got the link here, and I can also feel free to email me if you do have questions about that as well. And lastly, if you do have interest in technical assistance or training, I am just an email away to set you up with a subject matter expert and get your jurisdiction ready for updating a new code. Updating to a new code. Okay. I think that's all I have here, Shauna. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing.
All right. And I am going to share, hopefully, the right screen. Hopefully this is
Oh,
the
and
right
thank
one.
you for sharing the link.
Yeah, sure. Sure, awesome. All right, well, hello, welcome everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. I just wanted to go through and talk a little bit real quick about writing code. So you see on the Toolkit site that we do offer a lot of adoption assistance, helping people adopt their newer codes. And so we thought that one of the good things to do would maybe to be share with you what goes into that, what kind of effort we put into that, and how you could do that yourself, what kind of things you need to think about. So just quickly, you know, what do you need to do, things that you need to know about just writing code language. So you know, there's permissive language and there's formal language. So we want to use we try to use the words shall or shall be permitted instead of you may do this or you're allowed to do this. That's very permissive language. It's not very formal language. So those are some things to keep in mind when you're writing actual language. And pay attention to the punctuation, right? So there's a big difference, especially if you've ever sat through a code hearing and listening to just the argument over what kind of a difference a comma makes. And you can kind of get it in these silly examples that I've put up here, but there's a difference between we're going to cut and paste kids versus we're going to cut and paste kids, right? Like big difference. Let's eat grandpa. No, let's eat grandpa. So, or putting in things like, my interests include cooking, dogs, shopping, reading, watching movies. Well, it probably was supposed to be cooking, dogs, shopping, you know, so paying attention to those commas, they really do make a difference between how we lump things together and what applies and what doesn't. So, oh, I see a poll come up that looks like, are we doing that right now, Erica? Do you want to do the poll?
Yes, sorry. Yep.
Yep,
We've got some answers coming in.
Oh, okay, good. They can see it. Oh, okay, perfect. So, and then we want to talk real quick about how to use exceptions, how to use strike throughs and underlines when you're writing the code. So when we're doing that, let's take, for instance, let's just write a code change proposal together, right? So an amendment together. So if we're looking at this, our city council has decided that they want the jurisdiction to start requiring all houses to have 2-foot overhangs over all the windows, right? But only on the windows actually that are facing south, east, and west. Maybe we don't need it on the north. They also want all the homes to have Energy Star appliances and all the homes to have low flow shower heads in all the showers. So how do we put that into wording? Oh, and then they've decided, oh, well, we don't want it apply to houses that are painted yellow that have white trim. Okay, this is a silly example, but how do we write that up? And so you would, when you're writing new text, new language, it goes in with an underline. That means it's new. If it's text you're removing, it gets a strike through it. And so if this is going to be all new, we're going to write, we're going to put it in some formal language, and we're going to write, you know, the following requirements shall apply to all the homes located in the town of, we're just going to call it Codeville. So this is new language where all of these apply, right? The following apply to all homes. They want a 2-foot overhang, and so we're going to put it that it has to be permanently installed over all the windows. You have to give them some direction. Just say an overhang, they might set an umbrella outside the window. So you want to put, you know, some kind of formal language in there. That's one of the things that they asked for. But then they only asked for the overhang on the south, east, and west windows. So we're going to add an exception. The exception is overhangs are not required on windows facing north, right? So that exception applies to that requirement. And then we say, okay, well, Energy Star appliances have to be installed in all new homes. So we're going to clarify that it's for the new homes. We're not talking about existing. We're going to say when we want it in there so that they have a time frame of when we need to see that those are installed prior to certificate of occupancy. Right? Low flow shower heads. And what is a low flow shower head? If you don't define that, you need to put it somewhere in here. So that's meeting a 2.5 gallon per minute or less flow rate. Shall be installed in all showers. right? So that's our requirement. But then if we've met everything that they've talked about up here, except for, wait a minute, we don't want it to apply to houses that are painted yellow. So we put in an exception that says these requirements shall not apply to houses painted yellow with white trim. So you can see putting in new language is all underlined. And then how do you use the exceptions? The location of the exception tells you what you're accepting out. So you want to make sure you really put it in the right place. So this exception being indented here means it only applies to that one thing. This exception being over here means it applies to everything. So all of those requirements are accepted out as long as the house is painted yellow with white trim. So that's kind of just code language 101, how to write it. If you're also looking at removing something from the code, it's just a strike through, right? So we're in Colorado. Unfortunately, we don't have any tropical climate zones. I wish we did. But so maybe we just going to amend out anything that has to do with tropical climate zones to make our code easier to understand. I don't know. So you pick something that you want to delete and you can just strike through it. If you're going to strike through a whole section, you can just say delete the section in its entirety. So that's how you would kind of delete text. We're going to talk in a minute about how to replace text. You want to amend what's already there. But first, let's talk about why we would amend it. Right, so what are some of the reasons? Maybe your jurisdiction has certain goals. Maybe you want to go above code in some things. Maybe we just need to fix some things that we found are wrong or that conflict with other codes. Maybe we want to simplify the language. Lord knows that energy code can be pretty complicated wording. So maybe we just want to simplify it. And so we're going to amend it to do that. Or maybe we want to add more options and some flexibility, bring in some appendix chapters or address some local issues that apply to us. So let's talk about those real quick. So maybe my jurisdiction has some sustainability or climate action goals that I need to meet. We are going to be net zero by 2030. Okay, so how do we do that with a code cycle? So we have to figure out what kind of things are going to get us there. What are your goals? And what kind of things are going to get us there? And so we have to figure out how to write those things into the code. A lot of people saying we want to get to net zero. Is it net zero carbon? Is it net zero energy? What kind of net zero? So figuring that out. And then figuring out, a lot of people are talking right now about electrification of their buildings. So what does that look like? Or we want electric vehicles, or maybe we need to do some solar ready preparedness, or we want to conserve water in our jurisdiction. There's all kinds of things that people are looking at when we're writing the code. So how do we build that into a code? Well, my first suggestion is to not reinvent the wheel, right? You do not need to start from scratch on this because so many people have gone before you. Learn from their lessons and take the good that they've got going on and take the lessons that they've learned and use that to your benefit. So a lot of times when I'm helping a jurisdiction, like I had a jurisdiction that wanted to adopt the IGCC, but only parts of it. So I went to all the jurisdictions across the United States that have adopted the IGCC and are implementing it. And I say, okay, what's working for you? What's not working for you? What would you suggest to somebody doing this? And you can get all kinds of lessons learned of how to implement it, how to enforce it, what to write, what not to write, those kind of things. So see what other jurisdictions have done. Contact them to see, like I said, how it worked and what they would change if they could, and what they might plan to change on their next cycle after lessons learned. So those are good things. But also utilize your websites and resources of people who have already done it. So for example, this is an example of like a jurisdiction. I just bring up Boulder County because I can see that Boulder County has adopted and has amendments for their green construction code. Well, I'm going to go in there and see what those are. If they've amended them, let's see what they are. What are their amendments to the energy code? What are their amendments to the existing building code? I do a lot of research of all the different jurisdictions, especially ones that are surrounding me, right? To see what is everybody doing so that maybe we can get some consistency, but we can also learn from each other. And so I also utilize my resources. SWEEP, Southwest Energy Efficiency Project, what an amazing resource, especially when you're trying to meet those sustainability goals and those climate action plans, because look at, they have this whole section on building electrifications and how cities and counties are implementing it. So they have examples of what people are doing and good language that you could adopt. So why would you write your own when you can go see what other people are doing and get the language right there? Same with electric vehicles. This is off SWEEP's website also. And so, you know, they have all of these, a local policy toolkit for electric transportation. You can go there and get different ideas of what people are doing and some good code language for that. So you don't have to create it from scratch. And then also utilizing the toolkit that Erica just walked us through, right? So we have on there navigating the code adoption process, what kind of advanced building and stretch codes there might be out there. So that's another resource, just learning from what everybody else did. But what if you don't want to have this big, huge sustainability plan and you just want to do something a little bit more simple, but you still want to be a little bit above code? How do you amend your code to do that? A lot of people do that. So this is how you would write something. This is an example of how to go above code without going to this big, huge sustainability plan, but it's also an example of how to replace existing text. So in the commercial chapters of the energy code, there's this requirement for additional efficiency package options. And in the 2021, they revamped it to require that you have to get a certain amount of points. And so you could stick with that, or you could say, well, I want to be a little bit above code. What's a really easy way to do that? Okay, well, maybe instead of, because they require 10 credits, we're going to strike through that because we don't want it to say that anymore. And we're going to say you have to get 15 credits. And so you underline and say, I'm going to get 15 credits there. Not too difficult of an amendment to make, definitely, and an easy little tiny jump. But you'd have to go through, you know, and make sure that if you do this prescriptively, that, okay, now what if somebody goes performance, what are they going to do? You might have to require that they, you know, go an extra 5% or something above what they were going to do on performance, whatever that equals out to. So make sure that you keep all your paths equal. So whatever you do to one section, you need to make sure you do to the other paths as well. A way to do it residential, just another example, the 2021 residential brought in those additional efficiency package options like have been in the commercial since 2012. It's new. And this is, instead of points, it's like the old C406 that said, okay, you either put in higher efficient mechanical or higher efficient lighting, or you do a better blower door test, or, you know, that gives you those options and you have to pick one. A simple amendment to go above code without being a huge stretch is to just say, instead of one, we're going to do two. And so you would strike through the one and underline the two, and there you have amended your code. A lot of people doing that to make their amendments. One thing I want to point out is you can always amend the code to go above, but you cannot necessarily amend the code to be less restrictive. People used to amend out blower doors or amend out this or amend out that. Well, House Bill 19 that Erica talked about does say you can't make it to be less restrictive. So it's not like you can amend out blower doors or you can amend your scores to be less or whatever those that legislation prevents that. So I just want to kind of remind you of that fact. We also amend the code to fix errors, omissions, conflicts. So maybe there's some typos in there. I remember in the 2009 code, in the first printing, there's a table in there that's, you know, for, I think it's for commercial windows or something, I can't remember, but there it said, you know, if you're less than or equal to this, it's this requirement. If you're greater than or equal to this, it's this requirement. And they put the greater than sign on next to both of them. And so there was definitely an error there. We needed to go in and change that. So you can you can fix the code if you find errors or things like that, or omissions. Maybe you left out a footnote of a table, or you forgot to put something in there that you want, and so, or bring in that appendix chapter that wasn't adopted before and now you want to adopt it. Those are things that are normal things that we amend out of the code or amend into the code. Or conflicts. If there's going to be a conflict between two codes, it's usually the energy and the mechanical, but you can fix conflicts in the code. So an example would be, and I probably shouldn't share this with you because I don't want you to know about this loophole, but this is something that Robbie Schwartz and I have been fighting at the national level for several cycles and haven't won yet, but we're not giving up. I see that he's also brought it again to the 2024. So this is, if you're in the energy code, it tells you that building framing cavities can't be used as supply or return plenum. It can't be used as ducts or plenums, period. But when you're in the IRC mechanical section, it does have these, above ground duct systems have to conform to these requirements, and has these 7 requirements. And number 7 is talking about how do you, if you want to use the stud wall cavities, here's what you have to do. And it can't be used for supply air, but you could use them for return. And here, stud wall cavities in the outside walls shall not be utilized as plenums, but it's still allowing you to use the inside walls as supplies and as return plenums. And you just have to seal them. And so it gives you these things about how to use those walls as plenums, whereas the other code says you can't do it. Typically, when you have a conflict between the two codes, every code says that the most restrictive applies. And so definitely the IECC requirement is more restrictive and it would apply. But a lot of jurisdictions, instead of amending this out, they know the conflict is there and they leave it there because they want that kind of leniency to maybe make their own decisions. So if you're a jurisdiction that doesn't like conflicts, which is me, you would maybe amend number 7 out completely and just strike through it and say delete this in its entirety. You can't use building cavities as ducts or plenums. And then if there's some one-off situation, you handle it under alternate means and materials or something. But that's a way to amend the code for conflicts. And then simplifying the language. So the commercial code is, especially commercial energy code, is so complicated. So this is an example of the component performance alternatives where it says, okay, a building can meet this path of compliance as long as they meet the equation 4-2. And then if you look into the code, look at 4-2, this like, okay, A equals the sum of this, B is this, C is this. And so a jurisdiction is going, how am I ever going to do a plan review to this calculation? First of all, who's going to do the calculation? But if they do, how am I going to verify it? What in the world is this saying? Well, much of this is what is behind the scenes in ComCheck. So people think of that commercial or that compliance alternative and they automatically think of ComCheck. So they're like, all right, there's no way I can verify it to this. I don't have the capacity to verify this. So I'm going to amend it out and tell you need to use ComCheck, right? And so some jurisdictions do that. I see people put in ComCheck in their thing. What I would just caution you is we spend a lot of time at the national level when we write these codes not to put proprietary things in the code, because that could go away, or that says, okay, you have to use ComCheck, when there are other people who make the same software that does the same thing. And so maybe saying ComCheck isn't the right way. So one way to do it is say, okay, we don't have the ability to look at equation 4-2. We can't. I don't even know how to do that. So we're going to say, if you want to use this path, do ComCheck or equivalent, because things like the performance software like Ecotrope and all of a sudden my mind is going blank. They have the ability to create that UA trade-off approach to do those to do some of those things. So you don't want to just say you have to use ComCheck. You could say ComCheck or equivalent if you want to do that. And then you would just delete the remainder of this section, which is the equation. You would delete that in its entirety. That's how you would say that. We're going to delete the remainder of this section in its entirety. And then you might want to, if you do put the word ComCheck in your code, you might want to go in there and add a definition that says this is what ComCheck is, and here's where you'd find to download it. Go to energycodes.gov and download the free software or whatever. Somewhere you need to tell them where to find that ComCheck and what it is. So you would add that definition or something in there. So that's a way to simplify the language. It's much easier than looking at that whole equation that you're never going to verify anything to, and just say, here's how we want to do it. Some other things that other jurisdictions are doing is to add options to people. The more options and flexibility, sometimes, yeah, it's harder on us because we have to know more, but it's easier for the designer and the builder to meet the code requirements. So this is an example of the city of Aspen has added a simplified compliance alternative that just says if you meet these certain BTUs for heating or for cooling, you have to design your house in order pretty darn good in order to meet these low heating and cooling loads. So we are not going to tell you how or what R values or U factors or anything that has to go into this. We're just going to tell you you have to meet these heating and cooling loads. And if you do that, then you're in compliance. And there are some mandatory, you still have to do your blower door test, and there are a couple of other things in there for lighting and stuff. But basically just saying you meet these loads, that's a simplified path. Been proposed many times at the national level, and I think will get proposed again for the 2024. It's gaining more traction. And so that's an option for people to use. Or maybe if you're in the residential code, you see that all of a sudden, never before have we regulated solar heat gain coefficient for climate zone 5. We're in kind of, usually solar heat gain coefficient is for these hotter climates that use air conditioning all the time. We don't want all that solar heat getting through the window, so we regulate their windows. Well, now for the first time ever, solar heat gain has been put in place as a requirement in residential for climate zone 5. Maybe you want to have some sort of amendment to that. Maybe there's some kind of leniency you can give there. And so you could write in the section that requires solar heat gain, you could go down and put an exception. Okay, glazed fenestration shall not be required to comply with the SHGC requirements if complying with one of the following. Either they have permanently installed projections over their window, or it doesn't apply to north-facing fenestration. So you could say all the north-facing glass doesn't have to worry about solar heat gain. We'll just worry about it on these other south and west windows that are, get the most of the solar heat. So there are ways to provide options and flexibility in the code like that. Some people amend the code to bring in the appendix chapters. Those appendix chapters do not apply unless you specifically adopt them. So if you want like the solar ready zone and you want to adopt it, so you would say, okay, we are officially adopting this, and then you can make amendments to it. This is the example of the City of Denver's amendments to Appendix CA for solar ready zones. They adopted it, made it known that they adopted it, and then made it known that they have a couple amendments to it. So again, there's some great appendices in there in each code, but they don't apply unless you specifically adopt them. And then there's some local things that we talk about. So maybe you're amending the code because I know I had a jurisdiction that I was helping, and they said, well, we're going to amend the code because we're way out here rural, and we don't have a contractor base that does blower door testing. So, we have to make a few tweaks in here because it might hold up the job if they have to wait 3 days for somebody to get out here, or it's going to cost a lot more because they're coming from so far away. And so maybe there's some little tweaks. You can't amend it out anymore, but maybe there's some tweaks you can make about the process or something like that. Or maybe you don't have staffing. Maybe you don't have staffing to review certain thing, to do plan review. So you can amend your code to say that you're going to require third-party plan review, and maybe you have a list of allowed people that you use. Or you don't have staffing to do inspections, so you make an amendment in there. The state is going to do electrical, or the state's going to do plumbing, or whatever those things are. Or maybe you're landlocked, so you don't have any more land, and so there's not going to be a lot of new construction taking place. So maybe you're going to amend the code to say we're going to focus on existing buildings, and we're not going to worry so much about new construction. The majority of our amendments are going to be for existing buildings. Or maybe you're some of these jurisdictions, like I have some jurisdictions that are like, why do I need to move to a new code when all we have is a pole barn once a year? I mean, we don't have any construction going on, right? Or they say we don't have commercial buildings. So you say the majority of instead of amending out that code, because as soon as you amend out commercial requirements, somebody will want to build a commercial building. But you could say, instead of focusing on commercial buildings, we're going to focus our amendments on residential and what we can go after on residential to get there. So those are just things why people amend the code. I want to talk just a real quick. Erica mentioned the implementation plans that are in there. I have had jurisdictions actually put an implementation plan in their code adoption. So you could look up, I think it's the city of Fort Morgan, when we amended their code last time, they actually put this implementation plan as part of their document. It is part of their actual municipal code, the plan that just says, okay, we've amended the code, we've adopted this code on a certain date, and we are going to do a little bit at a time. We're going to learn together with our contractors and our designers. And so maybe our first training is going to be this, and then we're going to move into this. And here's some different trainings. Some people do like, okay, we've never really done insulation inspections before, so we're going to start there. And then we're going to go to manual J's because we've never done that. We're all going to learn that together. And then we're going to move to, and so you have these implementation plans instead of jumping in head over heels. You can take a little bit at a time and learn it. And so that's what those implementation plans do. They have good, maybe year one, this is what we're going to do. In the following years, we're going to follow it up with this will be our focus. And you can make that specific to you on what's going on in your climate, what your goals are, what your staffing abilities are, what your contractor base is. That's how you create those implementation plans. And then there's just, we're going to make we want to make an amendment just because we feel that it's what we need to do. And so some will say, okay, well, the code says you have to have a score of 55. We're going to ask you to have a score of 53 because that's what we feel is right for us. And so sometimes you make it, or maybe I like this one. I think everybody should adopt this one, that, we want everybody to have some training. And so we're going to amend C, because right now, Chapter 1 in the Commercial Energy Code, a lot of people skip by and don't realize that it says that there's a certain amount of training that's required for maintenance staff of buildings. People skip over that. I'm saying let's add to it and say, okay, all the contractors, designers, and third parties involved in verification of energy code requirements have to attend at least one Wednesday webinar a month that's offered by the State Energy Office, and we want some proof of that. Provide us a report that says that you met your monthly training. So we could write that into the code, right? It's underlined text. This is what we want, and we're specific about it. And so maybe that's what we want for us. We want some training for our designers and our contractors and our third party on top of what our code officials are getting. So those are just some things that you can write into the code. So it's not hard to write code, and so, but it can be intimidating. There's a lot of assistance available to you. So I just want to make sure that you know that we are here to help you. We speak to your city council. We have stakeholder meetings to sit down with you and say, hey, what are your goals? What are your staffing levels? What is your contractor base? What kind of construction do you have going on? What are the things that we need to think about when we're amending code? We'd like to not amend make a lot of amendments. So, but what are the things we have to do? So that assistance is available to you. We can write the codes for you. We can help you. We can do whatever. So make sure when you go to that toolkit, you can look to see on that website the technical assistance that's available to you. Right now, there's the code hearings going on right now as we speak at the national level where they're writing the 2024 codes. And so right now they're in the middle of writing the IBC general provisions. So you could go on iccsafe.org and find and view. You can just sit and watch them as they're writing code, so you can kind of get an idea of the thought that goes into it, how it's worded, what arguments are for and against it. They're doing that right now live through May. The code hearings are. So that's just another idea to get some help. That's what I have available for you. So please let me know if I can help in any way. But Erica, you want it? We could take some questions or?
Yeah, so feel free to either raise your hand or write a question in the Q&A box, and Shauna and I will stay on the line to answer any questions about some of the things that we presented today. We have received like a couple of questions about how the HB19-1260 legislature passed in Colorado and how other states can maybe get something like that adopted. And I think from what I've heard, it's, working with a lot of energy efficiency advocacy groups, finding a legislator who is willing to champion or sponsor the legislation and share the legislation language with them to adopt to make it as easy as possible. A lot of building code officials might also be on board, or local governments. So just kind of rallying the community and bringing it to a legislator to kind of kick it off.
I know that Christine Brinker with SWEEP was really active and involved in that. So that would be a good resource to you, is Southwest Energy Efficiency Project, their website, or contacting Christine.
Yep, definitely. And just to go back to the Colorado Code Collaborative, we can talk about this, and I think SWEEP reaches out throughout the Southwest region, and they are running these calls, so they're a really great resource to tap into on that call. So if you are interested in attending, feel free to reach out to me or Christine Brinker as well. So I think that's all that we have today, but Shauna and I will stay on the line for a couple more minutes. If any other questions do come up, feel free to raise your hand and I will unmute you. But otherwise, thank you all for attending today, and hope to see you next week. I think we will be presenting on, which one is it? Maybe the implementation plan next week, I believe. So we hope to see you then. But otherwise, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.
And thank you, Shauna.
You bet. Thanks. Looks like